In the past few months, as I've laid out plans for future videos and consumed a whole load of media I enjoy, I've realized a through line. I love a good mess, and I'll happily defend it. The Legend of Korra? Love it. Andromeda is completely enjoyable. Final Fantasy XV is too. The first American Godzilla is good, silly fun like most of that franchise is anyway. Japan Sinks 2020 is tonally inconsistent, visually mixed, and fails to fully execute on its core ideas. It would have been better served with marketing that didn't frame it as a fairly down-to-earth disaster story. I say all this with the caveat that I'm happy Science Saru took the swings they did, because despite the many weak points, it at least has me thinking. I'm here talking to all of you after all. And yeah, the latest from one of my most beloved anime studios is a weird one, but it left me with something to chew on because Japan Sinks 2020 is an excellent companion piece to their last Netflix exclusive, Devilman Crybaby. But before all that, I want to briefly remind everyone that I have a Patreon. I've recently added a $5 tier, so for $1 you can get your name in the credits and have access to bonus posts, which are the occasional thoughts I have about media that don't make it into a video or on Twitter. For $5 you now get all that plus video reflections where I talk about what I attempted to accomplish with my most recent work and how I feel about it in the end. Consider it a little behind the scenes commentary. Even if just 5% of my subscribers gave $1, I'd be able to afford a proper mic. So yeah, consider doing that, it would mean the world to me. Japan Sinks is an anime all about the demise of Japan through cataclysmic shifts in the tectonic plates. Like Crybaby, it wears its heart on its sleeve and is a clever if rarely subtle modernization of a classic story. While both have a message of persistence in the face of wide-scale calamity, Japan Sinks is the sobering reflection upon that message Science Saru laid out with Crybaby, with a few less degrees of abstraction. I did watch one video on the show before finishing this script, which I generally avoid doing, and that's Pause and Select's Why Japan Sinks is an Important Franchise in the History of Japanese Apocalyptic Fiction. Like I imagine most who have or will watch this anime, I didn't really know too much about the franchise. I'd heard of it in passing as a seminal piece of Japanese disaster fiction, almost on the scale of Godzilla, just without the international status. From understanding Pause and Select's video, that may be in part because Japan Sinks is so intrinsically tied to the idea of what it means to be Japanese. And that's some really important context I wish more people had going into this most recent adaptation. Though I don't feel I'm the person to talk about all that at length as a white American who went into this anime without that knowledge. My feelings as the finale wrapped up were obviously not about such questions, but rather that perseverance when you feel like you're living in an era of tragedy. There is a fair argument to be made around the brutality being a bit much. I'm kind of split on it, whereas something like The Last of Us 2 is a bleak affair whose violence is often in service of little more than just being nothing but violence, or at best to support a kind of plain revenge story. Japan Sinks uses that bleakness to make its themes of hope all the brighter. It too uses some more horrific events flippantly though. In fact, some deaths are exactly that, and on 2 occasions the threat of rape comes up in fairly throwaway scenes. And yeah, I get it. I got how awful this world was when Aimu saw her friends being crushed. I got it at the end of episode 2 when a significant death comes about with a tinge of dark humor. It underlines just how unfair the circumstances these characters have found themselves in are. That life and death often have a twisted sense of revelry in people's suffering. In 2015, indie game smash hit Undertale centered itself around a message of empathy, even for its most heinous villains, which understandably received criticism alongside the heapings of praise. Developer Toby Fox took this to heart in the follow-up Deltarune, where a little more nuance is allowed. It recognizes a similar radical empathy, but accepts there are those beyond redemption. Japan Sinks 2020 feels like it stands in opposition to Crybaby's unavoidable fate, that it cries out no world is doomed so long as we are still here. Because as bad as things can be, we bounce back. Progress happens. You may change, you may be forever scarred, but you are still human and still part of a society that can and will come out the other side of this. It's your job to make sure that's for the better. That struggle may get ugly, and we may have to cut off the parts of ourselves and society we can no longer permit to exist. But in doing so, a brighter future is possible. Like Crybaby, running is a recurring motif. Throughout the main cast, there are several runners. Ayamu, a promising middle school athlete who seems destined for the world stage, and her senpai Koga, who gave up on the sport. And like Crybaby, the show discusses how running is inherently not a strength of human beings. Here though, it has a broader usage. When the first massive quake strikes, Ayamu is in the locker room with her teammates. When she wakes, there are many who are severely wounded or dead. One in particular cries out for help, reaching her hand into the frame, another motif shared with Crybaby, and towards Ayamu. She's terrified though, overwhelmed in fact. She runs, in that process receiving a nasty gash on her leg. By the end of the episode, she is riddled with guilt and shame, crumpling to the ground in tears. Throughout the entire show, this wound, both mental and physical, keeps appearing, letting the audience know that it won't simply go away. We see it come to fruition in the finale. She, her brother Go, Kaito, and Professor Onodera have escaped Japan. Not all the cast were so fortunate though, and their loss has shaped the survivors. One of the most clear Crybaby comparisons is the death of Koga. It's another instance that hits right at a moment of hope. He even utters the line to Ayamu that he will pass the baton to her. The baton here being a tape with scientific data on it that can help restore Japan. It too is this really crushing moment for the cast, having to watch their friends swept away by the sea, but it's here where the diversion and response to Crybaby becomes clear. Eventually Ayamu comes to in a Russian hospital. A nurse gives her the news that the wound on her leg has become infected and amputation is unavoidable. The future she has once strived for is dead, right? Well, not really. Because though the sun has set on both Japan of old and Ayamu of old, what remains presses forward. Modern anime can so often seem like it's trying to avoid saying anything specific about the current socio-political situation. I'm happy that Japan Sings 2020 takes the swings it does so explicitly. There's a non-binary lead who isn't solely defined by the struggle non-binary folks face. There are mixed race leads who deal with the fact that Japan has very real issues with xenophobia, how that hatred has helped to fuel the rise of the far right and their push to return to the glory days. It reflects the world is going through an era that can so easily leave us feeling hopeless. Though I don't think it's my place to try and pore over every little detail as it relates to the question of Japanesehood or some of the topics I just mentioned, the sentiment of hope is one I can relate to. Because all the way across the world here in America, we need change. Need to accept that parts of our country have to become unrecognizable from how we currently exist. We may yearn to return to the past, but must accept we never can. I'm kind of waffling at this point, I admit. As I try to write this script and incorporate all that the show has given me to think about, the thoughts keep spinning. All of that from my admittedly very limited perspective. Like the anime in question, those thoughts are messy and not fully formed, and I can't speak to everything I want to well. But there is absolutely something there. So it's kind of frustrating to see the general reception not just be negative, but so dismissive. That, well, Japan's animation industry, or the great Masaaki Yuasa, has indeed sunk with this one. Even though, you know, Yuasa isn't the only person working at Science Sorrow, has taken some steps back recently, and their TV output has a lot of creative influence from their younger team members, but I digress. I hope to see more folks from a variety of perspectives write about this as time passes, because we deserve to have these conversations. That Japan Sings 2020 is a messy, unrefined anime, but at least it's capable of pushing us towards working through these thoughts. So yeah, like I said, support me on Patreon. You can also follow me at WordsMaybe on Twitter. And for all those who have already done so, I say thank you very, very much.